east of the country. So there were targets hit in Dnipropetrovsk region, for example, and in Kharkiv. But the main action is happening in the eastern Donbass region. And the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces say that what they are seeing now is what they think is the start of the big Russian push, as it were, to try to take control of the whole of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which is what the Russians have now stated as their main objective. And so Russian forces today entered, for example, the town of Kryminal, which is a strategic target not far from Severodonetsk, which is a big city in Luhansk region. Another city in Luhansk region that has come under attack is Popasna. These are places where Russian forces have entered, but where, according to the Ukrainian authorities, they haven't yet managed to completely take control, but they're clearly very much trying to do so. They're also pushing southeast from Izium, which is in Kharkiv region, but just at the edge of Donetsk region. This is perhaps the moment of truth, or a moment of truth, if you like, in terms of how strong the Ukrainian resistance is going to be and how strong the Russians are going to be, how much they have been depleted by the military setbacks that they endured, particularly in Kiev and Chernihiv regions in the north of Ukraine. They've said they want to take the whole of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and in the next few days, perhaps, we're going to be able to see whether or not they're actually in a state to be able to do that.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for that update. France 24's Gulliver Cragg in Komatinsky. Thank you so much. Well, Dnipro in the east of Ukraine is the country's third largest city, and it's currently flooded with displaced people. Well, Dnipro is also teeming with volunteers who are on hand to help those settling down there, or else who are perhaps just passing through. Well, France 24's team on the ground takes us now to meet some of those volunteers.
This theater in the city of Dnipro is now being used as a center to help distribute food and other items to internally displaced Ukrainians. This family arrived in the city fleeing from Kramatorsk in the Donbass.
We need clothes for the little one because she is growing so fast. Her clothes are too small. We don't have the money to buy any. That's why we came here, so that we could find something for her.
Some of those who were displaced to Dnipro are now volunteering and helping others who've just arrived. Ivan fled from Donetsk. He's now serving up hot meals in a restaurant in Dnipro.
I have now been displaced twice. I had to flee Donetsk to go to Kharkiv, and then I had to flee Kharkiv. I hope to go back there someday.
Every day, the restaurant where Ivan works serves around 100 warm meals, free of charge.
We don't have any money. I've been disabled since Chernobyl. First, I lived through Chernobyl, and now 2 wars in the Donbass. I can't go home. I don't have a home anymore. I can't be reunited with my family. They're in areas that are occupied. I don't know what's in store for me. I just want peace for us all, nothing more.
In Dnipro, some are only passing through, like this family who got in their van hastily, taking all they could as they fled the city of Pokrovsk in the Donbass. They're hoping to make their way to the center of the country.
I took my whole family and my cat. The government recommended that we leave because we don't know what is going to happen. However, my mother stayed there.
Each day, up to 15,000 displaced people arrive in Dnipro, according to the mayor, coming mostly from Kharkiv, the Donbass, and Mariupol.
Turning our eye now to some other world news. 10,000 troops have been deployed in South Africa to help with the relief and clean-up operations after deadly storms lashed the country's east coast. Well, the death toll from the flooding stands at more than 400, but dozens of people remain unaccounted for. Well, the city of Durban has borne the brunt of the deadliest storms in living memory, which have left around 40,000 people homeless. Well, France 24 has a team on the ground. They filed this report for us.
After a week of rescue operations, it's still raining in Inanda on the outskirts of Durban. Dozens of people are still missing. This is one of almost 200 rescue operations. The terrain is still very slippery. People have been asked to evacuate, and there is now no chance of finding anyone alive. Police dogs are used to find bodies that are buried in the mud.
I reckon the dogs need to go down first, identify, and then we know where we're taking them.
Kenneth Kamalo is a neighbor of the Magwazi family who was wiped out.
The house that was built here actually washed away by the landslide. The mother survived, the father passed on. The two kids, we're still looking for them, they're still missing.
The bodies of the children were never found. More than 400 people have died, many buried alive. Some blame the high death toll on poor infrastructure.
We came out and we saw the walls are moving down, and the wall was pushed the first house. We saw the house moving and the second house moved too.
Bridges collapsed and roads were swept away. Here it rained as much in one day as it normally would in 9 months. This engineer saw shipping containers being washed away.
They just got uplifted and they were floating down the freeway. I would say maybe about 7-8 kilometers that they washed down the bridge with the floods.
Rescue teams from across the country are on their way to assist local disaster relief efforts. The Premier of the province admitted that they need help.
We welcome the support from sister provinces. We are truly appreciative of this humanitarian assistance.
The cost of this natural disaster is still being calculated, but road damage alone is estimated at more than 200 million euros.
The authorities in Shanghai have reported that 3 people have died from COVID-19 there. Well, these are the first deaths to be reported in this current outbreak of the virus in Shanghai, which is China's most populous city. Well, the contagious Omicron variant has been sweeping through Shanghai, and a strict lockdown has now entered its 3rd week. Well, China has a zero-tolerance strategy to curbing this outbreak, and almost all of the new cases are currently in Shanghai. Well, France 24's Oliver Farry has this report for us. Sweeping through Shanghai. And
if we were to look at patterns of deaths in large outbreaks elsewhere in the world, it would stand to reason that there would be more than 3 deaths in the 375,000 cases that have been recorded in Shanghai over the past few weeks. Now, of course, as elsewhere in the world, there has been fudging over a number of the cases. The BBC reported last week that it had seen documents from one hospital that said at least 28 people had died with COVID. There are cases of people testing positive for COVID going into hospital and then dying. These have not been classified as COVID deaths. Elsewhere in the world, it has been the same. There have been deaths classified under other diseases, and there may well have been other causes involved. In fact, an awful lot of public health officials prefer to use excess death statistics in a particular year as a better measure of the effect of the pandemic than has been the case than rather official COVID deaths. Certainly China has probably been a little bit quiet on a number of its deaths. It's another matter whether the scale of how many deaths they're downplaying. Remember that Omicron is less fatal than previous strains of the virus, but really only for those who are vaccinated. And there are still quite a lot of elderly people in China unvaccinated, including the 3 whose deaths were confirmed today.
France 24's Oliver Farry reporting there. Up next here on France 24, it is France 2022, The Choice. That is our daily show presented by Mark Parrman. Up next here on France 24, it is France 2022, The Choice.
Welcome to France 2022, The Choice, our daily show covering the presidential race, and only 6 days to go before the decisive round 2. Emmanuel Macron vows to be greener than ever if he is re-elected, while Marine Le Pen sees all financial troubles resurface. Here is the recap of the weekend and of this Monday with Julie Sitbar.
It's the week Marine Le Pen has been preparing for. Not just the runoff, but the debate before the runoff. 5 years ago, she failed so miserably, her voters felt humiliated. 5 years ago, Le Pen moves head on, but she's got a dark cloud over her head. The European Union Anti-Fraud Agency is accusing her of embezzling public funds when she was MEP. European
de l'Union européenne quelques jours avant le second tour. J'ai une grande habitude de cela et je pense que les Français ne sont absolument pas dupes. Je conteste évidemment absolument ces accusations dont je n'ai pas eu connaissance, ce qui déjà pose un problème en termes d'état de droit.
For Emmanuel Macron, it's time to make closing arguments and convince undecided voters. Turning into Mr. Environment in Chief is the strategy.
La politique que je mènerai dans les 5 ans à venir sera donc écologique ou ne sera pas. Mon prochain Premier ministre sera directement chargé de la planification écologique.
Will taking Jean-Luc Mélenchon's words be enough to win over his voters? A poll carried out last week shows roughly a third of Mélenchon's backers plan to vote for Macron. The other 2/3 plan to vote for none of the two candidates. They were not allowed to choose Le Pen. The far-right candidate has made several U-turns in the race. The latest is an adjustment on the Islamic veil, which initially she wanted to ban.
Il y aura une politique volontariste qui mettra fin aux visées de l'islamisme radical sur notre sol, qui commencera par l'interdire dans les services publics et qui, par voie de conséquence, limitera dans la rue sa visibilité.
A change of heart, which Team Macron says is worrying.
Je m'inquiète surtout des revirements, des incohérences, des inconséquences de Marine Le Pen sur des sujets qu'elle instrumentalise ou sur lesquels elle ne sait pas vraiment quelle est sa position.
The lack of apartments, that is these activists' battle. They protested outside the candidates' headquarters, hoping their noise would finally wake them up. That is all from the campaign trail. Meet again tomorrow, same time, same place. Would finally wake them up. That is all from the campaign trail.
Okay, so a busy weekend there for the candidates. And Mark, what are the pollsters saying about their chances?
Well, our partner, Ipsos Sopra Steria, tells us that Macron has a 12-point lead now over Marine Le Pen, 56% versus 44%. It's the largest lead since the first round when it was 52-48. It's not as big as it was in 2017 when Macron won 66% versus 34% for Marine.
Thanks for that. Well, we're joined here in the studio by Maya Anais yet again. Very nice to see you, Maya. Now, you've seen this in the recap we just heard there. Marine Le Pen embroiled in a fraud inquiry, and all of this just a matter of days before Sunday's runoff vote.
Yes, the anti-fraud, the European Anti-Fraud Office, that's its name, alleges that the National Rally candidate and several of her party members misused about 620,000 euros in funds while serving in European Parliament. Maya, tell us a bit more about those very serious accusations.
Well, it's a damning 116-page report pointing the finger at Marine Le Pen and 3 other party members, her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, her ex-partner, Louis Alliot, and another National Front heavyweight, Bruno Gollnisch. All 4 deny any wrongdoing. Now, none of these people are accused of personally profiting, but of claiming EU funds to pay for their party staff and event expenses during their time as MEPs. Every lawmaker, every political group in the European Parliament can claim expenses for political activities, but only if they are carried out in the exercise of a parliamentary work. The Anti-Fraud Agency says that a part of those funds, EU public funds, have been used by Marine Le Pen and others for national political purposes, personal expenses, and for services that would benefit companies that would be close to her party and to the far-right parliamentary group, Europe of Nations and Freedom. And now the EU Parliament is seeking a full reimbursement of the allegedly misused funds.
Okay, so Maya, what is Marine Le Pen personally accused of here?
Well, she's accused of having personally diverted almost 137,000 euros worth of public money of EU funds when she was an MEP between 2004 and 2017. Our colleagues from Mediapart have reported about a series of incidents. Among them, in 2010, for example, she made a claim for the refunding of almost 5,000 euros in travel fees for 13 party leaders. Officially, those people were taking part in a meeting called the Regions and Europe in face of a financial crisis. But according to one participant, the gathering had nothing to do with European matters and was used to discuss the party's presidency. The European Anti-Fraud Agency says the allegations are susceptible susceptible to lead to criminal proceedings. And the Paris Public Prosecutor's Office today is looking into the claims, but it's worth noting that Marine Le Pen has not yet been summoned by any French judicial authority yet. With days to go before the runoff, the candidates team has denounced this timing chosen by EU authorities for such a disclosure. So take a listen to her communication director, counterattacking.
So it has come out just days before the second round. I think you can see that this is not very subtle. What I'd like to know is where we're at with the McKinsey scandal. The Financial Prosecutor's Office was real fast with François Fillon. But are they taking a nap for this one?
And Maya, of course, this is not the first time Marine Le Pen finds herself in hot water for alleged misuse of European money.
Yes, exactly. This particular probe has been open since 2016, but it's worth remembering that Marine Le Pen, since June 2017, has also been under investigation on allegations of breach of trust and misuse of public funds. She's accused of having given party members fake jobs as assistants at the European Parliament when they were, in reality, performing party activities in France. In 2018, European judges ruled that Marine Le Pen had to reimburse close to 350,000 euros worth of EU funds paid as salaries to, for example, we can see him on the picture, her long-time serving bodyguard and her France-based chief of staff when they were on parliamentary assistant contracts. Marine Le Pen back then refused to repay that amount, denying any wrongdoing once again. As a result, European authorities began withholding almost half her salary, as well as freezing her allowances and expenses. The EU Parliament has estimated the cost of alleged abuse by the National Rally to 7 million euros between 2009 and 2017. The cost of alleged abuse by the National Rally to
I have a funny feeling, Mark, that this issue is going to come up in the debate on Wednesday.
Well, this is probably going to be debated and probably denied once again by Marine Le Pen. It's the second time both Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen will face off their first head-to-head. It was a clear victory for Emmanuel Macron and, according to Marine Le Pen's own words, her worst political moment ever. So obviously both are prepping in very different ways. Let's take a look at how they are indeed reading all their material and preparing attacks on each other with Shannon McCausland and our colleagues from France reading all their material and preparing attacks on
Wednesday, a pivotal day for France's presidential campaign. Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen will go head-to-head once again on live television. But what are their strategies for the upcoming debate? Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, one thing's for sure, they'll not want to repeat of 2017. But what are their strategies for the upcoming debate?
They're in the countryside, in the towns.
It was a debate filled with insults that left Macron as the clear winner against the far-right candidate.
Stop saying ridiculous things.
But Wednesday's face-off will be a bigger challenge for the incumbent president.
People will compare the debate to 2017. Everyone will say she has progressed, so it will be positive for her.
Le Pen will prepare with mock debates with an expert who fits Macron's political profile. The French president has been taking notes of Le Pen's moves to guard his place in the Élysée.
She is spending a lot of time preparing. I'm still under threat in this debate. It's really serious.
Neither candidate wants this to be an aggressive debate, but Le Pen is not ruling out confronting Macron.
It's really serious.
If it's an occasion where we can have a hard debate and where his track record can be addressed, then yes, it will be a key moment of the campaign. If it's an occasion where we can have a hard debate and where his track record can be addressed, then yes, it will be a key moment of the campaign.
We're going to get a bruising. We have to unmask her and unravel her program.
The two candidates are prepared for this debate where everything is at stake. It's a clash set to be watched by millions nationwide ahead of the April 24th runoff election where everything is at stake.
And France 24 will carry that debate live. It starts at 9 p.m. on Wednesday, Paris time, and we'll have, before that, a special campaign show starting at 8:40 p.m. on Wednesday, Paris time, and we'll have
lots happening this week. Well, in the lead up to the presidential vote, we're going to take the pulse of the country. Our journalists Julie Dungelhoff and Florence Ville have been crisscrossing France, meeting voters, trying to understand their daily lives, their concerns, and as you'll see, their ideas for the future.
Yes, and today, Tom, we're heading to the Paris suburb of Bagnolet, where the Lannou, as it's known, neighborhood is cut off from the center of town by a motorway. Locals have decided to make the enclave into a bustling hub. A lot of it thanks to one man, the energy of one man, community organizer Alassane. To make the enclave into a bustling hub. A lot of it thanks to one man, the energy of one man, community organizer Alassane.
I was born in Senegal. I came to France when I was about 2 or 3. I've been in Lannou since 1984. It's what they call a priority neighborhood. It's here where I found all the bricks that allowed me to lay foundations and build myself as a human being. So I owe this neighborhood a lot, and today I want to give back as much as I can in a reciprocal way. So I owe this neighborhood a lot, and today I want to give back as much as I can in a reciprocal way. I run the cultural center these days. I used to come here as a kid and a teenager. What drives me, and I think I owe it to my education, is the desire to do my part to try and reduce inequalities. What drives me, and I think I owe it to my education, is the desire to do my part to try and reduce
make all the delicious things that they might see in a bakery but can't afford. They learn to make it themselves at home.
Helping each other out really makes a difference. Intergenerational communication really makes a difference too. This neighborhood is nice to live in, despite other problems. I'm not saying everything is rosy here. Intergenerational communication really makes a difference too. The delinquency rate is very low. The baccalaureate success rate is pretty high compared to other neighborhoods around here. I'm going to see Vincent, the artist.
If Lannou had a mayor, it would be Alassane. Seeing Alassane's energy inspired me to give more and invest myself socially with the kids in the neighborhood or at the local community center.
I take pleasure from helping others. It's all about making connections.
With the kids in the neighborhood or at the local community center.
I take pleasure from helping others. It's all about making connections. If I were president, I'd make sure the expertise of each individual is recognized. Today, our society requires too many diplomas, and that means you miss out on people's skills, and that's too bad. Today, our society requires I'd ensure that society is more inclusive and that each person's diversity is taken into consideration. Today, our society I'd ensure that society is more inclusive and that each person's diversity is taken into consideration.
All that report by our team at Julie Dungelhoff, Florence Vimino and Georgia Yazbek. Now let's finish on a lighter note, shall we, Mark?
Yes, a much lighter note, I should say. A picture of Emmanuel Macron was taken this weekend on the sidelines of a rally in Marseille and really has been a hit on social network. You can see him relaxing on the couch, laughing, and his shirt is unbuttoned, and his chest as well. Let's put it this way, it is not a stolen picture. It was taken by his official photographer, Soisy de la Moissonnière. It obviously prompted a flurry of memes, jokes, parodies, and everything. So this is a lighter note for this Monday.
There we are. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. And thank you as well to my analyst at Outbreak. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow, as I said, at 8:15 p.m. Do stay tuned to Fast Food as well. My analyst at Outbreak. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow, as I said, at 8:15 p.m. Do stay tuned to Fast Food.
Everything you do on the web leaves a footprint. When you look for directions, post on social media, or subscribe to an app, all your information is compiled, stored, checked and analyzed by tech giants.
You have to think about their business model is collect as much information as possible so that they can then sell that information who wants to find exactly you.
Across the world, citizens are striving to protect their privacy.
There are many, many ways that you can remain confidential even in this hyper-connected world with a lot of state surveillance.
So, is it only possible to go under the radar to cover your online tracks? We've got the guide on Reporters Plus. So join us on France 24 and France24.com. Cover your online tracks. We've got the guide on Reporters Plus. So join us on France 24 and France24.com. Cover your online tracks. We've got the guide on Reporters Plus. So join us on France 24 and France24.com. Cover your online tracks. We've got the guide on Reporters Plus. So join us on France 24 and
This is live from Paris. It's 8:30 p.m. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson, and these are the headlines. Russian forces launch missile attacks on a multitude of targets across Ukraine, including the safe haven city of Lviv in the west of the country. Russian forces launch missile Dozens of people are arrested in India in connection with the weekend's communal violence, which broke out between Hindus and Muslims during a religious celebration. Dozens of people are arrested in and with 6 days to go until the second round of the French presidential election, polls suggest that Emmanuel Macron is on track to win with 56% of the vote to Marine Le Pen's 42nd round of the French presidential election. Polls suggest that Emmanuel Macron is on track to win with 56% of the vote to Marine Le Pen's 42nd round of the French presidential election. Polls suggest that Emmanuel Macron is on track to win with 56% of the vote to Marine Le Pen's 42nd round of the French presidential election. Welcome back. We begin with the latest on the ground in Ukraine, where Russian forces have today pounded numerous targets across the country. This appears to be an intensifying effort by the invading forces to wear down Ukraine's defences ahead of an all-out assault on the east of Ukraine. Well, today's targets included the western city of Lviv, which is about 80 kilometers from the Polish border. Missile attacks there resulted in the deaths of at least 7 people. Lviv is a city that's become a haven for people fleeing fighting elsewhere in Ukraine, and until now it's only seen sporadic attacks. Our reporter Philip Crowther is there in Lviv. He gave us the latest. Fighting elsewhere in Ukraine.
Well, the black smoke on the horizon here in the city of Lviv has now disappeared. Only the second time since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine that we have seen that black smoke here, that there have been Russian missile strikes inside this city. Today, 4 missile strikes from Russia hitting 3 military targets. We don't know much more about what exactly those were. But one place does not appear to have been, was not in fact quite clearly a military target, and one would hope that the intended target was not hit, because this was simply a car repair shop. We saw that place a few hours ago. We saw burnt out cars, burnt out buildings, and right next to those burnt out buildings, another one that is a hotel, and that is where quite a few refugees from other parts of Ukraine had come from more dangerous places, in theory, to not see those scenes anymore. But now, a bit of a reminder for Ukraine and for the people here of this normally peaceful city of Lviv, that Vladimir Putin's army has the possibility of hitting pretty much any part of Ukraine with its missiles when it wants to. Air defense works well here most of the time, but it didn't this morning. That's why we now have 7 people dead, at least 11 injured, and 3 of those in critical condition. But it didn't this morning. That's why we now have 7 people dead, at least 11 injured, commentator
Doug Herbert. Doug, good evening to you. Just listening to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, sounding pretty defiant as usual, and shrugging off the sanctions sanctions that have been imposed on his country up until this point, saying they're not really having any effect at all. This is what he said, as usual, and shrugging off the sanctions that have been imposed on his country up until this point, saying they're not really having any effect at all. This is what he
Стратегия
said.
экономического блицкрига не удалась. Более того, санкции не прошли даром и для самих инициаторов. Имею в виду рост инфляции и безработицы, ухудшение экономической динамики в США и снижение уровня жизни европейцев, девальвация и безработицы, ухудшение экономической динамики в США и
These sanctions by Western countries are actually sort of self-inflicted wounds and are shooting themselves in the foot.
There's nothing new really in this line from Vladimir Putin. This has always been sort of the Russian line on sanctions. Has been the West is doing much more damage to themselves when they impose sanctions on Russia than they are to Russia themselves. The Russian economy is resilient. It adapts. In 2014 they grew their own cottage industries to replace the Western products that weren't supposedly getting them anymore. The Russians are able to ride out just about anything. And so, Putin, it's a massive real shrug. It's like right back at me to the West. We talk all the time, the West politicians here, about the severe consequences of the sanctions. That's going to be a massive shrug economy. Some of it comes from wishful thinking, because the fact of the matter is, I just want to bring up a chart of the Russian ruble here, for instance. The Russians have, Putin's leadership, they have stabilized the ruble. Back before the invasion in sort of mid-February, the ruble's right now back at the levels it was before the invasion on February 24th. It's, just over 80 rubles to the dollar. And, to give you a sense of how much of a stabilization, recovery of the ruble that is, Tom, at one point in early March, it was over 130 rubles to the dollar. And how have they done it? Well, it's not magic. What they have done is they have imposed very, very draconian currency controls. That means they have curbed the amount of money that foreigners can take out of money that Russians can transfer abroad to foreign bank accounts if they have them. They have ramped up, at least in the beginning, interest rates. Why do you do that? Banks put interest rates up, make them higher. That encourages people to keep money, rubles in this case, in their bank accounts and not to spend them, not to use them. And most importantly, it's the energy. The energy import revenues, the money they get from the oil and gas that Russia still hasn't imposed sanctions on, it's billions and billions of dollars, hard currency right now. Russia has been able to, even as the West has restricted its currency reserves, has been able to use these revenues, huge income from its energy export, in order to buffer the West, has literally give itself a financial cushion to stabilize the ruble. It doesn't mean they're out of the woods. Putin isn't entirely wrong when he does point to rising prices, rising unemployment, and a changing a worsening economic situation in Europe. He's able to basically say, in your face, his approval rating in Russia right now is over 80%. Russians sort of love that line, because the Russians, almost most Russians you ask, they will agree with him that, sanctions are ridiculous, they're absurd. They don't, at the end of the day, doesn't the West realize it's going to hurt them more than it's going to hurt almost most Russians you ask?
Yes, but that said, Russia is still facing a foreign default, and that is the first time in a century the country's been in it.
Absolutely, the first time actually it would be if it were a full default on its debt payments. It would be the first time since really the ouster by the Bolsheviks of the last Tsar, Nicholas II. You have to go back to 1918. But what you're having here is Russia's actually, here's the buried headline here, Russia's actually already defaulted, except in financial terms it's called a selective default. What happened was, over the past week, 2 bonds, U.S. issued Euro bonds, came due. They were a collective payment combined 650 million euros. Now, because the sanctions have restricted Russia's ability to pay in dollars, they can't pay it in dollars, but they have to in terms of the contract. They ended up paying it in rubles. So it was basically what happened is the ratings agencies cried foul on Russia. They said, you think you paid off your debt, but you didn't. You can't pay in rubles, you have to pay in dollars. So they're still waiting. They have like a month to try to work things out. But Russia claims they can pay, it wants to pay, West isn't letting it pay. Technically, it's in selective default. So they're still waiting. The economy is about to contract this year, bring it out. Russia claims they can pay, it wants to pay.
Thank you very much, Inter International Affairs commentator Doug Herbert. Thank you. The Israeli military shot and wounded 2 Palestinians today during clashes that broke out during a raid in the occupied West Bank. This happened close to the city of Jenin when the Israeli troops began carrying out a raid, but they were met by stone-throwing protesters. Well, the raids come in the context of heightened tension operations in which at least 14 people have been killed in Israel, and in which at least 25 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli troops. Well, against this backdrop and following clashes at a flashpoint holy site in Jerusalem, an Arab party which made history last year by joining the governing coalition in Israel announced on Sunday that it's suspending its participation. Well, let's get more now from France 24's Iris Makler in Jerusalem. I just want to start by asking you, Iris, about the significance of this suspension of its participation in the coalition by that Arab party. What does that mean? I just want to start by asking you, Iris,
it means a lot. It's significant for the party itself. It's the first time an Arab party, indeed an Islamist party, has been part of a coalition government in Israel. And now, 10 months later, this religious story, the sight of Israeli troops inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, has announced easing their participation. It's also significant for the coalition government itself. It had a slender majority of 61 seats out of 120. A couple of weeks ago, there was a defection from the Prime Minister's own party, a right-wing Jewish politician defected, 60-60. If now there are 4 more politicians who are no longer going to be part of this government, it could mean the end of the government. The one 60th of luck, I guess, for this particular coalition is that it's the parliament is currently in recess, and that means there's no need to vote on anything. And perhaps by the time it returns in May, this story may have calmed down, but it also may not. So Israel really is on the brink of a political crisis brought about and perhaps by the time it returns in May.
Yeah, and Iris, today a reminder of the tense situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Rockets, or one rocket at least, fired by Palestinians, we're told. What more details have you got about the Israelis and the Palestinians?
I can tell you that there was a rocket fired from Gaza into Israel. It was intercepted by the Iron Dome anti-missile shield. So I guess the significance of this is not the effect that it had. Only one rocket, and it was intercepted. Although there were still sirens on the border and towns in Gaza, on the Israeli side of the border. Warning people that there could be more to come. The significance, I think, is the fact that there are towns in Gaza fire at all. It's a sign that the militant groups in Gaza, that's Hamas and Islamic Jihad, are sending a message to Israel about the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they're saying, we are involved, we in Gaza are involved with the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and we don't accept your behaviour during Ramadan. And what's interesting is that this is precisely what began the war in Gaza, which took place a year ago, in fact, last year in May. So it's a warning, and what's interesting, nervous, they don't know precisely what into Israel, and it's a definite sign that the militant groups in Gaza see themselves involved in what's taking place in Jerusalem.
Thank you very much indeed for that update, Iris Makler in Jerusalem. Thanks, With less than a week to go until the second round of the French presidential election, polls suggest that the incumbent Emmanuel Macron has the edge over his far-right rival Marine Le Pen. The Ipsos Soprasteria polling agency has given Macron 56% to Le Pen's 44%. However, in recent years, polls have tended to underestimate the performance of far-right candidates, meaning the outcome is far from being a foregone conclusion. France 24's Catherine Viette has in recent years, polls have tended to underestimate the performance of far-right candidates, meaning
convince voters. That's Marine Le Pen's mission as she campaigns in Calvados in Normandy. She's hoping to expand her voter base, convince voters. That's Marine Le Pen's mission as she campaigns in Calvados in Normandy and grab some supporters of left-wing firebrand Jean-Luc Mélenchon. It's meant she's had to reconsider her position on banning the headscarf after her run-in with a Muslim woman Friday on the campaign trail. She now says there may be some leeway for seniors.
I'm not insensitive to stories such as that of an older woman whose son fought for France. He said to me, she wears a headscarf because she's elderly, and that it doesn't hold the same meaning for her as it does for the young women who are forced to wear it because of social pressure.
Campaigning in Marseille on Saturday, Emmanuel Macron was hoping to burnish his green credentials as well as pick up votes votes from the left. Mélenchon placed third in the first round with nearly 22%, but in a survey carried out by the former candidate, only a third of those who voted for him say they will back Macron on Sunday. Still, Macron's campaign says he's committed to fighting climate change, a key concern of those on the left.
You go further and stronger. That's what the president says. It's what he expects of the French and what he expects of the world too. If Marine Le Pen is elected, France would be the first, the only country in the world in the Paris Agreement to stop renewable energies and even cut back the expects of the French.
The two candidates are also prepping for a high-stakes debate on Wednesday that's likely to prove decisive ahead of Sunday's vote.
Stop renewable energies and even cut back the expects.
88 people have been arrested in India in connection with communal violence at the weekend, which broke out during a religious celebration. Well, a dozen police officers were injured in the violence, which broke out when the Hindu procession passed by a mosque in the north of New Delhi. Observers say that religious tensions have risen under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Hindu nationalist BJP party. Was Delhi. Observers say that religious tensions have risen under the leadership
This is the aftermath of a Hindu religious procession that passed through a Muslim-majority neighborhood in New Delhi. Several participants had held up swords. As they approached the local mosque, trouble broke out. Both sides blame each other for starting the fight. In New Delhi, several participants had held up
They started shouting things like, if you want to stay in India, you'll have to chant to a Hindu god or else go to Pakistan. Remove the mics from the mosque, close the meat shops. There were some boys who couldn't tolerate this, and God knows what happened. Why do they have swords? Why do they need to do that?
Authorities have since arrested dozens of people, but this is far from an isolated case. The same weekend, a mob attacked a police station in Hubli, injuring 12 officials, blaming them for not doing enough after a provocative anti-Muslim message went viral. In recent weeks, there's been a spate of religious violence. 13 leading opposition figures signed a joint statement expressing their shock at the silence of far-right Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
This silence is an eloquent testimony to the fact that such private armed mobs enjoy the luxury of official patronage. We are deeply concerned, as reports indicate, that there is a sinister pattern. Incendiary hate speeches preceded the aggressive armed religious processions unleashing communal violence.
The ruling Hindu Nationalist Party denies that there's been a rise in intercommunal tensions. Critics such as Human Rights Watch, though, say hate has been normalized under a leadership that promotes Hindu supremacy. Critics such as Human Rights Watch, though, say hate has been
Fake, our daily fact-checking segment in association with the France 24 Observers. I'm joined by James Green. Hello, James. Hi, Tom. Now, a Twitter account that appears to be linked to the BBC has shared an alarming quote attributed to the incumbent, Emmanuel Macron, here in France. I'm smelling a rat.
All the things on the segment are fake, so it is indeed not the most authentic tweet ever issued by the BBC. In fact, it didn't exist at all. And but of course, to the untrained eye, or even to be honest, to the rather keen eye, this looks like the real deal because you've got the little blue tick up there next to BBC World, and it's anyway just to be for anyone with volume down, this is not the real deal. Just to make that very clear visually. So it looks like a BBC tweet. It uses the graphics. It's got the blue ticks, etc. And what it has is a quote attributed to the French president saying that over the next 20 years, 60 million refugees are going to arrive in Europe, and that quote is linked to sanctions on Russia and a kind of an economic collapse in Africa because of imports of Russian refugees. All very convoluted stuff. And of course, in an election that is pitting Emmanuel Macron against the far right, with immigration and issues such as refugees coming out of Ukraine and whatnot very much front and centre of debates and policy, this is something that even if the president had said it, and let's just make it clear, he never said this. If you search left, right and centre all over his official declarations, he never said this. It never was uttered at all. And even if he had uttered it, would he be drawing attention to such a complex and divisive divisive issue in a campaign when Marine Le Pen is sort of beating the drums of we don't want too many immigrants or refugees. Unlikely. So I suppose the content is really the first thing that should alert one to the fact that this might not be the real deal. In any case, it's worth pointing out that it was a screenshot. If you were to go onto the BBC World's official Twitter account and go down to the time that tweet was supposedly published, it doesn't exist. So if you do a little bit of sleuthing, going onto the official account, scrolling down to where the screen grab claims to have been published, it just didn't exist at all. Now the photo was actually a photo on a BBC article tweeted somewhat earlier in the day. This is going back to the 11th of April. So there was just a bit of doctrine that went on, and then it ended up essentially being tweeted by Russian news agents, Russian politicians rather. It also got an awful lot of traction on Telegram, and you can see here, I think the Telegram channel in question, Intel Slava Z, that's an aggregator of Russian news covering conflicts and geopolitics, and it got 130,000 views just clocked up today. That's the number of views it got so far on Telegram. So you can see the way in which this can really take off, and then it can be relayed from there elsewhere. In any case, our journalists did speak to somebody from BBC Monitoring, one of their journalists, Olga Robbins, who she said, look, this is very similar, you might remember, Tom, to other false fake news attributed to BBC media. Last week we were talking about their segment, saying that Ukraine had targeted the train station in Kramatorsk, and most people, I think, at this point can safely conclude it was a Russian missile, not a Ukrainian missile targeting its own train station. So it's the same sort of techniques being used here, and what can happen then, unfortunately, is that it ends up on the Twitter feeds of politicians, Russian state TV, etc. In any case, it's completely fake, and not only did Emmanuel Macron never say it, but certainly the BBC never ends up on the Twitter feeds of politicians.
Bit of copy and paste work going on there. Now, staying with the French presidential election, the far left candidate who came third in the first round of voting, I'm talking of course about Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Fake news, copy and paste work going on there. Concerning him is also doing the round.
All right, so this is a screen grab from an interview that he gave back in 1991, and the headline of the article says, at the time he was a Socialist Party politician, before leaving the Socialist Party, the mainstream left, to vote in the direction of far left politics. And he said the only party currently regenerating politics is the National Front, at the time when Jean-Marie Le Pen was head of the party. Now, he did actually say that, but it was taken out of context. He was being critical of the Socialist Party for not regenerating politics or offering new ideas to the electorate, and he preceded that quote by saying, I'm going to tell you something awful. So he wasn't praising or supporting the National Front at the time. He was just alluding to a lack of new ideas on the part of the Socialist Party. But that has been, the whole thing is his 21% of the vote is within spitting distance of getting into the second round. Marine Le Pen getting 22%, the runoff candidate. Both candidates are now hoping they will attract 21% of the vote section of that electorate.
Okay, and just briefly before we wrap up, a rather surprising photo of the French president.
There you go. Now, some looking at this photo were actually wondering on Twitter, and it's not really fake news, but some were saying, is this real? Was it Photoshopped? What's going on here? Why? This is a very relaxed image of the president with his shirt buttoned down and some chest hair on him. But this is actually the style of the official photographer of the French president at the moment. You'll remember that particular image of the president working through the weekend in hoodie towards the beginning of the Ukraine war. So it's very much the style of political communications and of the official photographer of the French president, despite some thinking, some raising an eyebrow as to whether or not it's the real deal.
So it's very much thank you for telling us all of that. James Creedon for today's edition of Truth or Fake. Thank you so much. Up next, it's Focus. Today we're in India looking at the meteoric rise of the gig economy. But India's app-based workers appear to be increasingly frustrated with their working conditions. The France 24 team went to investigate. Today we're in India looking at the meteoric rise of the gig economy. But India's app-based
Markets on his blue shirt to go to work, a routine he's been following for the last 5 years. a common uniform for all the taxi drivers in New Delhi. Before starting his 12-hour shift, he makes sure that his car is in good shape.
I have to clean the vehicle to get a good customer rating, otherwise they'll hire someone better rated.
The competition among ride-sharing apps is intense in New Delhi, where 400,000 drivers work in the industry. A graduate in computer science, Rajesh left his job as a teacher in 2017 to join this US-based startup company that promised high pay. But as he started ferrying passengers around the city, he realized it was a sham.
I feel cheated. When I joined this company, they promised me that they would give me a business of up to 1,300 euros. But right now, forget about all of that. If we can somehow make even 400 euros, then that's a miracle.
To attract more customers from India's huge market, ride-hailing companies offer fares that are the cheapest in the world. In New Delhi, the minimum fare for a trip is as low as €1. With his income, Rajesh needs to cover costs for maintenance and pay installments of a loan he took to buy this car. Not to mention the company's 30% cut into his earnings. Each month, Rajesh struggles to meet the expenses of his family with 2 children.
When I get into the car in the morning, the first thing I do is spend money on petrol and maintenance. The costs are quite high. In addition to that, I also have to buy food and provide for my children's education.
Behind the success of the gig economy is a business model that favors the companies. Uber, Zomato, Swiggy, Urban Company are among the biggest firms of India's 800 app-based service providers. India has seen a boom in startup companies offering on-demand services in transportation, personal care and food delivery. For millions of people, these companies are a means to come out of poverty and fight unemployment, which crossed 8% in 2021, the highest in 3 decades. So is the case with 23-year-old Shubham, who became a delivery boy after losing his job when the pandemic hit.
I just accepted this order and now have 30 seconds before I have to leave for delivery.
Every order has to be delivered in 40 minutes. Within that, he needs to pick food from the restaurant and deliver it to the customer. Racing against the clock, he faces the challenges of pollution, harsh weather and traffic jams. Navigating a narrow maze of lanes in New Delhi is also not an easy task.
Sir, I'm here.
Every step of Shubham is timed. After working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, he earns 120 euros. He is at the mercy of the platform, restaurants, and above all, the customers.
We are their slaves. The policy of the company is that the customer has to be satisfied. They'll give us a low rating, which could get us in trouble and lower our income. They don't care that sometimes there are traffic jams, or that the order spilled because it just wasn't packed properly to begin with. Even worse, if the customer cancels the order, the company deducts the full amount from my earnings.
Gig jobs are not new to India, where 80% of the workforce are employed as daily wages in the informal sector. Experts believe online platforms have aggravated their vulnerabilities. In the absence of regulations, they have no legal status. They are neither employees nor self-employed.
I think gig work companies are reliant on an unemployment crisis. They are creating a further informalization of an already largely informal workforce. There is no social security, there are no labor protections, there is no safeguards for hazards at the workplace.
Demanding accountability and better working conditions from companies can lead to bitter consequences. Beautician Seema Singh was working with a personal care platform until a few months ago. But one day the company decided to raise its commission.
That's me there in green. They took me away.
Along with dozens of other workers, she protested outside the company's headquarters. The company immediately filed a lawsuit accusing her of protesting illegally.
The company threatened the protesters, and the police also called us to the police station. I worked 4 years with them, and I became jobless in the blink of an eye. I'm just sitting at home. They grew into a giant company with our labor. We worked so hard. And after all that, what do we get?
Recently, the Supreme Court of India issued a notice to the government to extend social security benefits to gig workers. According to a report by the Boston Consulting Group, India's gig economy has the potential to generate 90 million jobs in the next 8 years.
That was today's edition of Focus. Well, I'll be back at the top of the hour. That's in just over 2 minutes from now. Stay tuned.
They observe. They contact us. They report, film, photograph. They are the voice of the voiceless. Your eyes in the far-flung reaches of the world. The Observers, a network of 5,000 committed citizens working with France 24.
One of our observers in Côte d'Ivoire, Gaspard.
Amateur footage and testimonials checked by our journalists and broadcast weekly on The Observers, on France 24 and observers.france24.com.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches. Bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Thanks for joining us. See you again. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
This is live from Paris. It's 9 p.m. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. These are our headlines. Russian forces launched missile attacks on a multitude of targets across Ukraine, including the safe haven city of Lviv in the west of the country. Thousands of troops are deployed to areas of South Africa affected by the deadliest storms in living memory, which have claimed the lives of more than 400 people. And with 6 days to go until the second round of the French presidential election, polls suggest Emmanuel Macron is on track to win with 56% to Marine Le Pen's 40%.
Our Muslim
Hello, I'm Mariam Namazi in London. You're watching Al Jazeera. Also coming up on the program this hour, Shanghai announces its first official deaths from COVID-19 after almost 3 weeks of a grueling lockdown. Sri Lanka's president has promised change as he swears in a new cabinet but ignores calls for him to quit over the economic crisis. And arrests and injuries in Sweden after a far-right politician's plans to burn the Quran triggers 4 days of riots. Hello and welcome to the program. Ukraine says it sees signs Russia is beginning its new offensive in the east to take complete control of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. This as Russian forces step up their attacks across the country. The governor of Luhansk says that the town of Kremenia, north of Mariupol, has fallen to the Russians, with 4 killed as they try to flee. Missiles hit the western city of Lviv. Kharkiv has also suffered more shelling, and Russia has launched more strikes on the capital, Kyiv. Well, there were 4 missile strikes on Lviv. One destroyed a vehicle repair shop that killed 7 people. These are the first civilian victims in the city, which had previously been considered something of a relative safe haven for people fleeing other parts of the country. 11 others were injured. Western city's been mostly unscathed by violence, and it's temporary home to those displaced and those who are trying to leave Ukraine. Well, more people have been killed in the latest shelling in Kharkiv in the east. Witnesses say they hit residential areas. Russian Defense Ministry says it destroyed 16 Ukrainian military facilities in Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions, and in the port of Mykolaiv in the south, as well as in the east of the country. Well, at least 1,000 civilians are hiding in shelters under a steelworks in the besieged city of Mariupol. This is according to the city council, which says Russian forces are dropping heavy bombs on the plant. Russian troops and allied rebels now control most of Mariupol, but Ukrainian forces are still defending parts of it. The commander of the Ukrainian brigade there has appealed for help in a letter to Pope Francis, telling him the city has become hell on earth. Major Serhiy Volina says women and children are among those trapped in the steelworks. Ukraine is warning that Russia is now planning to destroy its industrial eastern regions. Al Jazeera's Charles Stratford in Dnipro has more.
After those strikes on the western city of Lviv, it's fair to say that there has also been what is being described as an escalation by Russian forces in their attempts to take control of more territory here in the east. We're hearing reports of at least 11 civilians killed in the city of Kharkiv, sporadic but heavy shelling in that city last night and throughout the day. We're also hearing reports from the Ukrainian authorities in the region of Lugansk, they imploring civilians to leave the area because of what they describe as the beginnings of a major push by Russian forces in that area. We understand that at least 4 civilians were killed as they tried to escape a village that Ukrainian forces admitted had been taken over by the Russian military and pro-Russian separatists, we understand, earlier today. Meanwhile, the besieged city of Mariupol in the southeast. 7 weeks of being bombarded by Russian and pro-Russian forces. The mayor of Mariupol saying that at least 100,000 civilians were still trapped in that city. The Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine saying that humanitarian corridors for a second day had been cancelled because of what she describes as being Russian shelling. Also, interestingly, certainly according to the mayor of Mariupol, he's saying that at least 40,000 Ukrainian civilians have been forcibly deported to the Russian side of control there. So, huge concerns for hundreds of thousands of civilians across the east of this country, as I say, what is being described as potentially the beginning of a major offensive by Russian forces in the Donbass region.
Kira Rudik is a Ukrainian MP and leader of the holiest party, joins us now from Kiev. First of all, if I can ask you to describe the situation there.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for having me. So there was additional missile attacks on Kiev today in the morning, and just right now the air raid siren went off. What Putin is trying to prove is that nowhere in Ukraine we can feel safe, because the attacks were today throughout the country. We had first people who were killed in Lviv since the beginning of the war. The attacks were on Kharkiv, on Mariupol, on Zaporizhia, on Kiev, and even in the western Ukraine. What we see is that without the Air Force protection, without the missile jets, and we will not be able to definitely make sure that there is a safe space in our country.
For weeks now, the suggestion was that Russia would begin a new offensive in the east in order to take complete control of those territories. What information do you have about an escalation in military action there in that part of the country? Has that now started?
So from the reports that we are getting right now, the actions that Russians are taking are the signs of this wide and massive attack on the east, the fight for Donbass. The positive matter there is that they finally start fighting Ukrainian army instead of coming and taking places where civilians are located. And the positive point is that Ukrainian army has been preparing for this for 54 days, and we had received supplies and weapons. The, of course, negative point is that still there are many pieces of weapon in transit, and that we will, no matter what we are getting from our allies, we would definitely need more. What we are fighting right now is one of the largest armies in the world, and the amount of soldiers that they are having and they're bringing is terrifying. However, what we can definitely say is that since the beginning of war, our army has shown the high level of professionalism, and we have proved to the whole world that we will be fighting bravely and that we will be fighting as one.
But I suppose if the siege of Mariupol succeeds, that allows there to be more resources then deployed elsewhere. How are the Ukrainians preparing for greater attacks on the east of the country? Because it seems as though that area is going to be now encircled.
So Mariupol is a painful subject for us. First of all, because we are not able to get an agreement for the humanitarian corridors for the civilians, for women and children to get out of the city, so that our defenders can continue defend it. This is, again, extremely unfortunate and related to the inability for us to protect the skies, because there is no even a convoy or additional supplies that we can bring up to Mariupol to make sure that our military and are staying for longer there, because any attempt is just destroyed on the way by Russian Air Force. So it all comes down to the thing that we are asking since day one, to the fighter jets and artillery, so we can protect our skies and then protect everything else. Make sure that our cities are safe, and make sure that we can move them weaponry and supplies.
Kira, may I ask you about Mariupol? You said it's a painful subject for you, and for over a month now, people there have been living without water, heating, and proper medical care. What is life like for people in this besieged city?
You said it yourself. It's without food supplies, without water, without medical aid. So what the reports and information that we are getting, it's humanitarian catastrophe there. My people are dying of hunger. They're eating dogs and pigeons. They are dying of some basic illnesses, and there are children who are dying of dehydration. Could you imagine that in 21st century, in the center of Europe, children are dying of dehydration? How is it even possible? How did the world allow these things, these atrocities to happen? And this is why it's so painful, because for 54 days, it's been happening. We are saying that we need help and support, and we need some possible agreements to let the people out of the city. But so far, there has been no progress, not even in negotiations, not even in bringing supplies to the city. So it's just everybody is watching on my people dying there.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I appreciate it. From Kiev, Kira Rudik. Well, a mammoth clear-up operation is underway in the northern city of Chernihiv, parts of which lie in ruins after Russian forces retreated. Rosso Soda visited the area and met people trying to rebuild their lives.
This is all that remains of 8-year-old Hannah's house. She lives in the neighborhood of Bobrovitsa, on the outskirts of Chernihiv.
There is no water, electricity, and gas. No one comes here and asks. No one does anything.
She's not the only one to have lost her home. Her neighbor, Alexei Serada, shows us what was once his pride and joy. All that's left are the ashes of a previous life. His home was first hit by Russian bombs in the early days of the war, and again on the 10th of March.
Now I have nothing. The ceiling and floors have burnt. The most painful thing is that all my memorable documents have burnt. I didn't need them, but I kept them as souvenirs. I'm a retired pilot, and I kept all my pilot logs there.
Despite having lost all his possessions, he looks to the future with hope.
Come back in 2 years. I will rebuild everything. We will have a barbecue together.
Chernihiv woke up to the rocket attacks on the first day of the war, when Russian troops crossed the border from Belarus. Despite being besieged, it did not surrender. And finally, on the 30th of March, the Russian forces retreated from the region. But Chernihiv has paid a high price. Andriy and Svetlana's home was hit 3 times, and now they are trying to salvage whatever remains. We are cleaning this mess, Andriy tells me. What can we do? We don't need help, but others do. Svetlana adds ironically, you see how our Russian brothers have helped us? We met Hannah again in a nearby shelter.
They have shown me my room already. It is a nice room. I will stay here as long as I can. I don't have a choice.
Our center was created for children with psycho-neurological difficulties. When the bombing started, many people came here as they were looking for shelter. We became a shelter for those who needed it.
For Hannah, it might not be an ideal setup, but at least she now has a roof over her head. Not only this rehab center for children has changed after the war in Ukraine. Civilians are now becoming frontline workers, helping to rebuild the country. And they say in this process, they are more united than ever. Resul Serdar, Al Jazeera, Chernihiv.
Ukraine's president has taken a crucial step forward in the country's application to join the European Union. Volodymyr Zelensky has handed over a completed EU questionnaire. Part of Ukraine's campaign for accelerated membership to the bloc. It was given to him this month by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen during her trip to Kyiv. A decision on whether it can be considered a candidate country could be made within weeks.
We understand this is a formal step of Ukraine towards the European Union. We understand our people have been mentally in Europe for a long time, with their hearts and souls there. Nevertheless, every country must take this path. Unfortunately, we're going through it during such a tragic period. Many people with European mentalities are losing their lives on this path.
Moscow's mayor has warned about 200,000 people in the Russian capital being at risk of losing their jobs because foreign companies have either left or suspended operations. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has told his economic officials that Western sanctions are backfiring.
Now we can confidently declare that such policy has failed with respect to Russia. The strategy of economic blitzkrieg proved unsuccessful. Sanctions are hitting the initiators very hard. I mean rising inflation, unemployment and worsening of the economic dynamic in the United States and Europe. Declining living standards for Europeans and the devaluation of their savings.
Well, video posted online appears to show the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva, on fire just before it sank on Wednesday. Russia has released few details about how this happened. The Kremlin says the vessel was being towed to port after catching fire, but Ukraine says its missiles struck the ship. You're watching Al Jazeera live from London. More still ahead this hour. Palestinians arrested and injured as Israeli forces raid villages in the occupied West Bank. Stay with us.
Hello, the weather is looking a good deal more unsettled across much of Europe over the next couple of days. Cooler for most of us and also turning a little wintry in one or two spots, would you believe. We've got a fair amount of cloud over towards that eastern side of Europe, a little more cloud and some weather systems over towards the northwest, not causing too many problems here. The wetter weather, there's that wintry weather, that's going to come into central parts, sliding down across the Balkans over the next few days. Turns increasingly unsettled too across Spain and Portugal as we go on through Wednesday. Some big downpours coming through here for that western side of the Mediterranean. Not too much sun in the forecast here over the next day or so, and notice a little bit of snow over the higher ground, so cool enough for some of the white stuff. Cooler and some wetter weather into the far north of Morocco. Much of northern Africa will be dry. 1 or 2 showers into central parts, southern areas of Egypt. Plenty of showers just around the Gulf of Guinea. Southern parts of Nigeria seeing some heavy rain. Wet weather too into Democratic Republic of Congo. Those showers slide right across the tropics. Wetter weather once again coming back into Zimbabwe. I'm pleased to say we have now got some dry weather making its way into KwaZulu-Natal. More the way of sunshine across a good part of South Africa, but turning increasingly wet for Mozambique.
In 2018, a journalist led 40 days of civic action against the Armenian government and President Sarkisyan's grip on power.
I'm going to Liberty Square.
A new documentary follows his non-violent campaign to bring down a corrupt regime and its astonishing outcome.
We've begun a democratic velvet revolution.
I Am Not Alone, Armenia's Velvet Revolution, on Al Jazeera.
Main developments this hour. At least 7 people have died after Russian missiles hit the Ukrainian city of Lviv. They are the first civilians killed in the western city, which had previously been considered relatively safe. Ukraine says it sees signs Russia is beginning its new offensive in the east of the country. Around 1,000 civilians are trapped in shelters under a steelworks that's surrounded now in the city of Mariupol. And at least 4 people have died after Russian forces seized the town of Crimea. Now, the developments, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has told his economic officials that Western sanctions are backfiring, with the measures causing a surge in inflation and unemployment in the US and Europe. Well, in other news, at least 1 rocket has reportedly been fired towards southern Israel from Gaza. Israel's military says it was shot down by its missile defense system. This follows dawn raids carried out by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank that left several Palestinians injured. More than a dozen people were also arrested in villages near Jenin and Ramallah. Local Palestinian groups say they were detained and taken to investigation camps. Nida Ibrahim has more from Jenin in the occupied West Bank.
We're here in front of the intensive care unit of one of the hospitals in Jenin. 2 Palestinians who were wounded by Israeli forces' fire on Monday are residing here. The families say that the doctor has told them that one of the injured is suffering and is in a critical condition. Of those who are still getting treatment in this hospital is a 17-year-old. Hanan Lekhdur's family was telling us that she was in a bus minding her business when she was hit by a bullet from Israeli forces.
When she woke up and realized what happened, she was shocked. Why? Who did this to me? I was on my way to class. Why did this happen to me? She's still traumatized.
In this hospital alone in Jenin, 55 Palestinians were treated since the beginning of this month, which gives you an idea about the intensity of the situation here in Jenin. 2 of the attackers who killed 8 Israelis belong to this area, but people here say that their life under the Israeli occupation has been marred with a lot of raids, a lot of Israeli violations, but that the eyes are now turned on them.
Well, tensions are still high at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. Thousands of Jewish worshippers gathered nearby at the Western Wall to mark the Passover holiday, but Israeli forces stopped some Muslim worshippers from entering the Al-Aqsa compound. 20 Palestinians were injured and 18 arrested while being dispersed by Israeli forces on Sunday. The Palestinian-Israeli Ram Party has suspended its participation in Israel's coalition government because of violence at the holy site. Now, Chinese authorities have reported 3 coronavirus deaths in Shanghai, the first in the city's latest outbreak. Shanghai is in its 3rd week of lockdown as China continues to enforce a zero-tolerance approach to try to end the outbreak. Another round of mass testing is taking place. More than 300,000 cases have been reported in Shanghai since late March. Health officials say those who died had underlying health conditions. Richard Brubaker is an entrepreneur based in Shanghai who's been locked down with his family for 18 days. He told us what life has been like there.
The first week of partial lockdown, it was almost normal. You could go around your community. Even though my son was at home learning through school, we were able to kind of, get around the city. We could do what we wanted to. We could buy groceries without much challenge, or at least have it delivered. But the full lockdown has been the real challenge. In the first week, I'd say, a lot of anxiety, a lot of people trying to buy food who hadn't prepared fully, but also just trying to understand what is the timeline, how serious is the situation, what's going to be the impact to business, to education. Like, those are some real concerns and a lot of anxiety. The second week was a little bit easier, I would say. They were starting to see some releases. We're getting some ideas that things might be lightening up. But the last week has been kind of back to anxiety again, where the duration of 3 weeks, 4 weeks for Pudong have really kicked in. And I have a team member that's over 40 days now in her home. And so there's a lot of anxiety now building up around what will be the next 2 weeks to 2 months of this lockdown, but also now China-wide.
In other developments, there's been an attempt to end the political turmoil in Sri Lanka. New ministers have been sworn in 2 weeks after the entire cabinet resigned. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa promised change and expressed regret for his government's handling of the economic crisis. But protesters are not happy, as Manel Fernandez reports from Colombo.
After days of protests against Sri Lanka's government, 17 ministers take their oath before the president. Most are young, with little political experience.
The crisis that exists today is a good opportunity to bring changes to the system that people are asking for. You have got that opportunity. Along with that, I am asking young people to assist that process.
Sources tell Al Jazeera that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa wanted more experienced people in the cabinet. He did not attend the swearing-in. The president's decision to bring younger people into the cabinet is seen by critics as a way of acknowledging and responding to demands made by youths in countrywide protests against him and his government. The country is suffering its worst economic crisis since independence from Britain in 1948. A shortage of foreign currency has left the government unable to import basic essentials, leading to price increases and shortages of food, medicine, cooking gas and fuel. Tens of thousands of people have demonstrated for more than a week at this protest ground outside the president's office in Colombo. And the reaction to the new cabinet here was no surprise.
It's of no use at all. It's the same kind of crooks, just different faces coming in. This is not a solution.
We came from Kurunigala to somehow chase them out. We honestly have no way to live because of what they are doing. We are managing with great difficulty.
After months of denying an economic crisis, the government has downplayed the protests and is seeking help from the International Monetary Fund. But some economists say it may be too late.
Most of the young people we spoke to here say they're not happy with the appointment of a new cabinet, and that as long as President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa remain in charge, things will be the same. Manel Fernandez, Al Jazeera, Colombo.
The South African government has deployed some 10,000 military personnel to search for people still missing after severe flooding and also to help restore power. It's now a week since record rainfall began pounding the East Coast, flooding Durban and the surrounding regions. 443 people died, but more than 60 people are still missing. In one town near Durban, community members joined police and sniffer dogs to try and find a woman swept away by the rushing waters. More than 270,000 children might not be able to return to class on Tuesday because of damaged schools. Now, dozens of people have been rescued from the Atlantic Ocean near the Canary Islands. 61 refugees and migrants, including 9 children, were picked up by the Spanish Coast Guard. They were taken to a port on Gran Canaria. Human rights groups say at least 4,400 people, including hundreds of children, died last year trying to reach Spain from Africa. Dozens of people have been arrested during 4 days of riots in Sweden, triggered by a far-right group announcing plans to publicly burn copies of the Quran at rallies. Protesters and police were injured in these clashes. Violence started on Thursday at protests designed to oppose demonstrations organised by Danish-Swedish politician Rasmus Paludan, who leads the anti-immigration and anti-Islamic hardline movement. Andreas Onofores is a professor of intellectual history with the University of California, Berkeley's Institute of European Studies. He says far-right parties are finding it easier now to spread their message.
What we have seen is both an outrageous reaction upon his burning of the Quran, but on the other hand also a very naive view upon the freedom of speech and its limits and what the Swedish law can do and not can do in situations like this. Global far-right has been experts over the last 10 years to use things that they stage in real life, so IRL, and for online dissemination. That's the point. It's a low-budget action. You take a book, you take a pack of bacon, you burn it up. It doesn't cost you anything, but the PR effect is immensely higher. And that is exactly what they want to do. And I find it outrageous that the Swedish state allows that person a stage to abuse our fundamental rights for his own promotional value, because that is what's going on here. So conspiracy theories disseminated about the Swedish social services, stealing children from Muslim couples and putting them into camps and stuff like that. And that happened when the war between Russia and the Ukraine was started. So I would say we have a context here where we have forces who have something to win, to stoke tensions within Swedish society. We haven't seen the proofs for that yet, but when it comes to the conspiracy theories about the Swedish social services, we could see that they were part of foreign influence operations. It would not surprise me if you would find traces of this here as well. And these are organized criminals, but somebody has told them where the police is and that they are going out there to have a good time, so to speak, to give the police a kick. And that is really worrying, because even if the decision to allow Paludan to burn a Quran is based upon a wrong idea upon Swedish free right of expression, the problem here is that, of course, that these criminals are abusing that as well.
Finally, Argentina's transport ministry has released CCTV footage of a young woman who had a very lucky escape. She was preparing to board a train in Buenos Aires when she fainted as the train was still arriving and fell onto the tracks. Railway staff and police officers managed to pull her out and take her to hospital, which later discharged her with no serious injuries. This happened at the end of March. The video has only now gone viral, and it's extraordinary. Just a quick look at the main stories now. At least 7 people have died after Russian missiles hit the Ukrainian city of Lviv. They are the first civilian victims in the western city, which had previously been considered relatively safe. 11 others have been injured. Elsewhere, several people have been killed in shelling in the eastern city of Kharkiv. Witnesses are saying the attacks targeted residential areas. Russian Defense Ministry says it destroyed 16 Ukrainian military facilities in the southern and eastern regions. Well, the Ukrainian president's chief of staff is saying that Russia has started the next phase of the war, an offensive to take control of the east. Around 1,000 civilians are trapped in shelters under a steelworks that's surrounded now in the city of Mariupol, and at least 4 people have died after Russian forces seized the town of Kremina. Moscow's mayor has warned about 200,000 people in the Russian capital are at risk of losing their jobs because foreign companies have either left or suspended operations. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has told his economic officials that Western sanctions are backfiring.
Now we can confidently declare that such policy has failed with respect to Russia. The strategy of economic blitzkrieg proved unsuccessful. Sanctions are hitting the initiators very hard. I mean rising inflation, unemployment and worsening of the economic dynamic in the United States and Europe, declining living standards for Europeans and the devaluation of their savings.
At least one rocket has reportedly been fired towards southern Israel from Gaza. This video, which was uploaded by Israeli media, appears to show a rocket being fired towards the town of Kisufim. The Israeli military says it was shot down by the country's missile defense system. It followed dawn raids carried out by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank, which left several Palestinians injured. More than a dozen people were arrested in villages near Jenin and Ramallah. Well, those are the top stories of Following This Hour. Much more coming up a bit later on. I'll be back with another headline update at 2000 GMT in about half an hour's time. The stream is next, looking at how American interests are undermining the fight against climate change.
Hi, I'm Femi OK. Thanks for watching the stream. One of the biggest news stories of our time is our global climate crisis, and that is why Al Jazeera is part of a global collective of journalists called Covering Climate Now. We bring you stories about climate all of the time so you can stay up to date. One of the biggest scandals in the climate emergency is the dark money that is filtered in to climate action to either slow it down or stop it. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's actually fact, and that is what we're delving into today. US special interests versus climate action. We're going to be doing that with our guests. Hello, Michael, Rebecca, Charlie. Good to see all three of you. Michael, welcome to the stream. Please introduce yourself to our global audience.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm Michael Mann. I'm a professor at Penn State University and a climate researcher and also author of The New Climate War.
Good to have you. Hello there, Rebecca. Welcome to the stream. Welcome back to the stream. Remind our audience who you are, what you do.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Lieber. I'm a reporter on climate change at Vox.
Good to have you. And Charlie, hello. Introduce yourself to our global audience.
Hello, my name's Charlie Cray. I'm with Greenpeace USA, based in Washington, D.C.
Good to have you. So you have met all of your panel. If you're on YouTube right now, our comment section is live. Your comments, your thoughts can be right here. This conversation is part of the Covering Climate Now and Democracy series. So we're linking up US special interests with democracy. What is the problem? What have you seen? Let us know. You're part of the show. Mike, I'm going to start with you because your recent book, The New Climate War, suggests that there is a battle going on. What is that war?
Yeah, so, the old battle was this effort by fossil fuel interests and dark money groups, conservative foundations, conservative politicians, and media outlets, this effort to deny that climate change is real. But people can see that it's real. People can see that it's happening now. And so that just isn't tenable anymore. That doesn't mean that the polluters and those promoting them have given up the battle. Instead, they've turned to other tactics: delay, deflection, division, even doom-mongering to convince us it's too late. That's what I call the new climate war.
Rebecca, as you're reporting this, it sounds like a thriller, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but we have seen this before in the tobacco industry, and some of the same playbook tactics are being used in the fossil fuel industry to try and persuade the public that what they're seeing is not what they're seeing. Rebecca, how do you tell that story?
Exactly. This is a very similar playbook to what big tobacco used. But I think the most important thing about it is it keeps shifting, just like Michael said. This is no longer just a debate that climate deniers are trying to have over whether climate change is real or not. They're now shifting that to more obstruction and delay tactics. And just like we saw with tobacco companies, oil companies are intent on delaying climate action as long as possible.
Charlie, there's some work that the Greenpeace journalism arm did, which was they tracked down and found an ExxonMobil lobbyist. And I want to play a little clip of how he described his job, what he was doing, and then hear you talk about the damage that can be done by lobbyists in the fossil fuel industry. Let's have a listen. Let's have a look, first of all.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes. Did we hide our science? Absolutely not. Did we join some of these shadow groups to work against some of the early efforts? Yes, that's true. But there's nothing illegal about that. We were looking out for our investments. We were looking out for our shareholders.
That's exactly the playbook, a minor part of it, as Dr. Mann described. The lobbyists are crawling all over Washington, D.C. There's probably 10,000 registered corporate lobbyists, and the fossil fuel industry and some of the other interests that depend upon them politically, so to speak, are some of the most powerful on the Hill. We hear it all the time from Senator Whitehouse and some of the other senators and leaders who are trying to get climate-related legislation through and getting blocked at every turn. And so, it's not surprising, and in fact, it's not just these companies themselves. They often operate through very powerful business trade associations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
We wanted to share with our audience some of the places the money is coming from. I'm not sure at this stage whether it's dark money. So, Charlie, you can tell me when I show this to you. Grant makers, I want to do that in air quotes. Donors
Sure.
Trust, Charles Koch
Donors
Foundation.
Trust, the
Tell us about
Charles
them.
Koch Foundation. So those two, are really primarily connected to Charles Koch and a whole network of billionaires and centimillionaires who use these foundations as kind of pass-throughs to fund a whole slew of nonprofits, other trusts, limited liability corporations, and the money cascades down to a whole network. And what ends up happening is the ultimate recipient, you don't know where their ultimate source of funding is, and that's why we call them dark money groups, because these